Canadians sometimes now don't seem to be assimilating. To me, the mosaic is dead, okay? It's dead, and we ought to have now more of a melting pot. Right now, our nation is unarmed and undefended, okay? So we could not defend ourselves. You know, you got to understand, we could not defend ourselves. So you can have all the social programs you want, but if you can't defend yourself, you're either going to have your own army in your country or someone else's army in your country.
Sydney Fizzard for Rebel News here at the Military Museum in downtown Calgary for a special guest. Some refer to him as the anti-woke general. Many already know of the rapid decay our military is enduring. Captured by woke political ideologies, our armed forces have not only become a shell of their former selves, so too has their mismanagement hindered Canada's reputation the world over. From tampons in the men's bathrooms to soldiers being starved overseas. With few people more capable of diagnosing the state of Canada's armed forces and the political leadership crisis enabling rapid decay, from an insider's perspective, a highly decorated former Lieutenant-General, Assistant Deputy Chief of the Defence Staff, and Chief of Staff of NATO Allied Command Transformation in Norfolk, Michel Maisonneuve, has now taken to the public warning of the dangers that lie ahead, and what needs to be done to sustain the very bedrock of our nation. In this report, we interview the man himself just prior to his Calgary event, titled Canada's Leadership Crisis, during which he discusses Canada's crises of leadership and complacency, critiquing extremist progressive policies and lack of national vision and pride. This comes after he was cancelled in 2022, grilled in the media, and asked to resign from his then position on the board of directors at an organization researching chronic pain in veterans. All because of his acceptance speech made after receiving the Vimy Award, granted to those who have made significant and outstanding contributions to the nation. He then went on to open one of the Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre's events shortly after.
Let's be proud of the flag that our soldiers wear on their uniform. This is the flag that should fly front and center on all our government buildings.
After decades of silence, his anti-woke speech caused an uproar and launched him towards the writing of his recent novel, In Defense of Canada, Reflections of a Patriot. As Canada continues its rapid downward spiral led by the Liberal government's radical agendas, his voice on the matter provides critical insight from an insider's perspective on the disasters that lie ahead if things don't change.
I spent 35 years in the armed forces, finished as a 3-star lieutenant general. Then I served for another 10 years as a senior public official. I was the academic director of a military college and returned the college to a university degree. So I've had 45 years of serving my country. I had 45 years also where my freedom of speech was restricted because, of course, in the military and as a public servant, you're not allowed to criticize the government. They're your employer. I did not criticize openly the government in those days. I did my best to criticize internally. But since I've finished those roles, now I feel that I'm just an ordinary Canadian with the experience I have, the background I have, and I'm stating my opinion. So this book contains my opinion on a lot of issues. And I think it needs to be out there. And, you know, there will be some who agree with my opinion. There will be some who don't agree with my opinion. But the point is, it's out there. And Canadians need to have an opinion. They need to decide. They need to vote. And too often, that's why I say there's a crisis of complacency in our country. So tonight I've been asked to speak at the Royal Alberta United Services Institute, which is a group of individuals who want to get together and talk about important issues for our country. I've just published a book back in October of last year that in which I talk about the state of Canada, the state of our citizens, the state of our leadership. And so that's what I'll be talking about tonight.
Why is it important for you to be here tonight?
Well, as a veteran, I'm very concerned about the current state of the military, and as most people know, it's veterans that are the voice of the serving members because they can't speak on their own behalf. And I want to hear what the ex-general has to say.
To get a better understanding of, Canadian defense policies and our complacency over the years, and I guess, his perspective of the current events that's going on right now, and, to shed light on those things.
And I think we're all very interested in the status of the military in Canada. We've got smatterings of backgrounds, whether it's our parents or Steve, where we've participated in that. And I understand from what Mike's spoken about before and written, I'm going to read his book, try to get somebody, he's got his background, to give his opinion on where Canada should go from here.
I mean, I was born on a military base in St. John. My sister in Petawawa. My dad was in the military, so we grew up in the military and always had ties. My grandfather was involved in World War II in quite a way, so there's just sort of a feeling of importance to me. And so that's why I want to be here to learn a little more and also help participate.
The issues are not just about the armed forces, they're about our country in general. And I called it, there's a lack of leadership and too much complacency among, a crisis of complacency amongst Canadians. And so that has an impact on everything, specifically on the armed forces, of course, because our government has never really funded them enough. There are too many gatekeepers, and the impact of DEI on the armed forces. So these are all issues that we need to look at as Canadians. So lack of leadership, and too much complacency. Our Canadians, are willing to just let this go and don't really care about it. And that's what I'm trying to raise the profile of these issues, so that Canadians can do some research, listen to news, have an opinion. Don't just listen to the usual narrative, but look at Rebel News, for example, to get another perspective on things. And so that's, I think, the way we're going to correct this in Canada.
We're seeing that there are tampon dispensers being put up in the men's bathrooms. And then overseas, we're having soldiers that are requiring to spend out of their own pocket in order to sustain themselves. So how did it get this way?
Well, it went this way because we kind of followed the progressive agenda. I think the armed forces followed the progressive agenda. We also tried to, I think, take too many of the regulations that the public service serves under and force the Canadian Armed Forces to fit under that. Again, this is my opinion. The fact that our forces are buying their own equipment is absolutely ridiculous. We need to fund, the budget. The armed forces, given the budget to buy their own, to buy equipment. We need to ensure that we equip them. Look, I call it, Sydney, I call it the moral contract. The moral contract is our armed forces personnel. They agree to go and serve, to go and defend our values, to go and project our values in the places Canada wants us to do that. They accept to do that, even perhaps at the expense of their own life. We call that the unlimited liability clause. So that's what they agree to do. The other part of the contract is the Canadian public, represented by the government. That part of the contract should be that they will do everything in their power to ensure that those folks, men and women, have the best equipment, the best training, the best leadership to be as successful as possible. That contract is broken. We're not giving them all that. And the contract includes a clause also which looking after them when they come back from their military service, when they are finished their military service. And we're not looking after our veterans either, as well as we could be.
Trudeau's been funding Native American reconciliation more than he's been funding the military in a large degree. And I guess the question there is, well, what good is it to fund all this reconciliation if we get invaded?
Well, the point is right now our nation is unarmed and undefended. Okay, so we could not defend ourselves. You got to understand, we could not defend ourselves. So you can have all the social programs you want, but if you can't defend yourself, you're either going to have your own army in your country or someone else's army in your country. So it's a real important issue, and unfortunately, defense has never been top of mind for Canadians. It has never. A former professor of mine, George Stanley, who actually designed the Canadian flag, his design was what won out for the maple leaf, wrote a book that was called Canada Soldiers, the Military History of an Unmilitary People. So we've always been that way. After the Second World War, after Korea, we let our forces go way down. And right now we are missing 15% of our troops. It's absolutely ridiculous. So we need to do something about that. And funding all these special interests is fine, as long as first, the highest priority is you funded your defense forces.
Another topic of concern here in Canada is the amount of spending that we're doing on NATO. Obviously, you have a close relation to NATO compared to most people. What do you think about this, level level of spending that we're doing here in Canada?
Well, it's pitiful, really, is what it is. And we in 2014 was the first time that we committed to spend 2% of our gross national product on NATO, on the armed forces, and we have never met that. I mean, we're now something like 100 or 1.4 or something percent, and this government has said in its new policy that it's going to go up to 1.7% by 2032 or something. Then the Prime Minister announced that we're going to go to 2%, but there are words, but no plans. So what does that mean? That means that we're one of the only outliers right now in NATO spending. It also means that we can't fund the armed forces appropriately. It also means that we're in breach of contract. If I say I'm going to give $20 to the Salvation Army, I pledge it, and then I don't do it, it's a moral contract, but it's a breach of contract. In this case, our prime ministers and our government had committed to that with NATO, and we have not done it. So it hurts me to see that we are in breach of contract. It's a moral issue. And I'll tell you, the 2% is really the floor. We're supposed to be going to 3%, and we so we're going to have tough time doing it. But really, it's a question of courage by the government. It's a question of also making the right priorities, the right decisions. You're going to have to look at all the social. Canadians love their social programs. We're going to have to look at them and say, okay, it's going to hurt maybe in certain areas, but as you said earlier, it's got to be the number one priority. Our defense has to be number one priority. So I'm hoping that a change in government will help that.
Now, I've heard you touch on this in a slightly different way with regards to, Canadian pride. We need to have our statues, we need to have our history, we need to have our patriotism. And you touched on it there with a lot of the protests that are happening now for, foreign issues, where in many cases you'll see the Canadian flag being desecrated in certain ways. Do you think that the overabundance of immigration that we're seeing now, wave after wave, millions of people coming in, are they being properly Canadianized?
No. Okay, and the issue is we have never really defined what a Canadian is. Even our Prime Minister goes to the US and says, what is a Canadian? And he answers, not an American.
One of the ways we define ourselves most easily is, well, we're not American.
I mean, first of all, it's extremely damaging and nasty to the person who's interviewing you who happens to be an American. But the other thing is, that's not all we are. We don't need to compare ourselves to the US. We don't need to compare ourselves to anybody else. But we need to develop what is a Canadian? What are our values? What do we believe in? What unites us as a country? What an incredible country. We have 3 oceans. We have an incredible diverse population. We have an educated population and all these resources that we have. Nobody has defined what a Canadian is, so we need to do that. So as far as immigration goes, we have not Canadianized these people who come in. Our country was built on Judeo-Christian values, and we ought to ensure that that is inside what a Canadian is, that we're based on that. And anybody who comes from outside, an immigrant, assimilate themselves into those qualities, those values, and what makes a Canadian. And these people should not be coming here and bringing their all the nasty things that are happening in their country. Canada is an incredible country of immigrants who built this country. My parents-in-law were both immigrants. They came to Canada, built the country. They had businesses and brought up their daughter and their son here. But Canadians sometimes now don't seem to be assimilating. To me, the mosaic is dead. Okay, it's dead, and we ought to have now more of a melting pot. And that comes along then to also those things that unite us make us more patriotic. 25 years ago, I commanded the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier funeral in Ottawa. That brought Canadians together. Everybody here was this young soldier who had given his life, had given his tomorrow for our today. We need to really get back to assimilating our immigrants and making them Canadian and being proud of what we are, as opposed to comparing ourselves to being American.
To make it a very pointed question, Justin Trudeau, what is it about Justin Trudeau specifically? There's a lot that a lot of people can say about his lack of leadership, but what is the most palpable thing in your eyes that he is lacking in?
Unfortunately, our Prime Minister, and the way I can criticize him is he doesn't think about Canadians in general. I think the fact that he decided to remain on as prime minister, not have an election. There wasn't much mea culpaing there when he stood at Rideau Cottage and said that he was going to step aside. If he had thought about Canadians and not the Liberal Party or himself, he would have called an election perhaps even earlier than that, in the end of 2024. We are in dire need of new leadership, somebody with new ideas, somebody who's got Canadians back, somebody who's going to remove the gatekeepers, who's going to have common sense, who's not going to be a fake feminist as he is. And so those are the things where I think his leadership is lacking. I mean, to me, leadership means, first of all, you have to communicate, you have to build teamwork, you have to be a professional, not by dancing at a Taylor Swift concert when the flags are burning and people are rioting in the streets. And you have to bring in a little bit of happiness and hope to people. And he is failing on all those.
What's the biggest message that Trudeau needs to hear right now?
Fix it now. We can't wait.
Here are the people who have stated more than once that our military has to be brought back up to a standard that I think it was throughout the world, and really to take care of the veterans who've put the time in to help them.
Especially with what's happened, in the last few days, it's incredibly important that Canada come together and be tied together. And with such a large, vast area that we have to cover, we've got now to seriously think about protecting ourselves on the southern border, not just the north. The north is I don't know if people know, but I went up to take my dad to Cold Lake years ago and ask the question, okay, this is great, but what are we doing every day? And every day, my understanding is we're intercepting Russian planes. So that's a massive problem. And so the threat to the north is real. We need to take that incredibly seriously, and we need to protect our country and come together as great Canadians.
I think the Trudeau government actually has gotten many of the files correct. I think they did a good job on a number of them. But one where they certainly failed, and I guess we'll hear that tonight, is national defense. Certainly more money could have been put towards it, but mind you, previous governments also failed at the same in the same vein. So.
In this time period right now where there's a lot of strife and conflict around the world, that it's probably very important to spend more time and money with our military to get up to speed with everyone else.
Give us a better understanding of the impact of his policies and sort of what strategic direction we need to go in the future. So
the book is called In Defense of Canada, Reflections of a Patriot. And it's available on Amazon and Indigo and everything. But it came about as because of I was honored to receive the Vimy Award in 2022. I made a speech that I thought I was going to, at this point, give my opinion on the state of our country, and I was canceled the next day. So essentially, I've taken those ideas that I brought out during the speech, and it was in the middle of Ottawa, which, as you know, is a kind of a bubble and exists in its own kind of reality. I received a standing ovation, but the next day I was canceled by some academics, and I was let go by a veterans organization I was supporting. And so I was asked to write this book, and it expands on those things that I talked about in there. And so there's chapters on the environment and on climate change, and and as well as the armed forces, veterans, and so forth. But I really think that our country, which has the potential to be an amazing country, is just not reaching that potential right now. And as you know, right now, there is a crisis of leadership. Who is our leader? Who is our, we have a prime minister who is a lame duck, and he refuses to call an election. So that's it's very difficult for our country right now.
And as a final note to this conversation, is there any last words you'd like to add? Yeah,
I'd like to just say that Canada is a great country. We have an incredible potential, but we're not reaching it. And we need to really get behind it, and all we can say is God bless Canada.
To support our work, go to rebelnews.com. For Rebel News, I'm Sydney Fizzard.